When white smoke rose above the Sistine Chapel, the eyes of the world turned to St. Peter's Square. Amid the ringing of the bells, a silver-haired man stepped onto the balcony, not like a monarch, but like a guardian of faith's enduring flame. James Michael O'Connor, the cardinal who once shared meals with the homeless on Boston streets, who once knelt beside a dying child in Honduras, was now Pope Leo XIV. He was not the most talked-about name in the forecasts. But he was the one chosen in silence, in a time that needs courage and compassion more than ever before. On the afternoon of May 8, 2025, a hushed stillness fell over St. Peter's Square. All eyes turned toward the small chimney atop the Sistine Chapel. And then, white smoke rose. The bells began to ring. The crowd erupted. The Catholic Church had elected its 267th Pope. From the high balcony of the Basilica, a man in white stepped forward, gentle face, silver hair, and calm, steady eyes. Cardinal Jean-Louis Tauran solemnly declared, "Habemus Papam," we have a pope. The newly elected pope, James Michael O'Connor, the first American to ascend to the papacy, chose the name Leo XIV, a name that evokes both the strength of a lion and the longing for peace. He raised his hand and greeted the crowd in Italian, "Pace à voi, peace be with you." Then, slowly, in English, "Let us be builders of peace." In that moment, a sacred silence covered the square. Then, applause burst forth from the faithful, from pilgrims, and from bystanders who just happened to be there. His presence, simple yet deeply moving, marked the beginning of a new chapter in the Church's history. Just weeks earlier, on April 21st, Pope Francis had passed away after more than a decade of leadership. The world mourned not only a spiritual figure, but a powerful voice for justice, the environment, and compassion. The Vatican entered sede vacante. The seat of Peter was empty. On May 7, 133, cardinals entered the Sistine Chapel under a cloud of prayerful tension. After only 4 rounds of voting, an unusually swift result in modern times, they found unity. With cardinals from over 70 countries, it was one of the most diverse conclaves in church history. According to Cardinal Bassetti, a spirit of fraternal dialogue became the decisive factor. In a world strained by division from armed conflict to climate crisis, the Church sought a leader who could heal and unite. And James O'Connor, once considered a long-shot candidate, emerged as the unexpected but deeply convincing choice, a man of compassion, with real experience in reconciling polarized communities. A moment that entered history. A new papacy began. As the crowd's gaze remained fixed on the balcony, quiet speculation stirred across the Vatican about the new era ahead, and the names that were once expected but would now remain just that, expectations. Before the conclave began, the atmosphere in the Vatican was a mix of solemnity and quiet anticipation. In the cafes surrounding Piazza Navona, journalists, theologians, and pilgrims offered their own predictions. Most expected the election of a new pope to take at least 3 or 4 days, given the record number of cardinal electors and the wide spectrum of viewpoints across continents. 2 names emerged most frequently in conversation: Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican's Secretary of State, seen as a steady hand of diplomacy and tradition, and Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle of the Philippines, known for his missionary spirit and deep connection with the poor. Others mentioned Cardinal Jean-Claude Hollerich of Luxembourg, a strong voice for a European church eager for renewal. At the time, James O'Connor, Archbishop of Boston, was not among the leading papabile, the widely expected candidates. But during the pre-conclave meetings known as general congregations, where cardinals gather in private sessions, he left a lasting impression. His calm demeanor, his ability to truly listen, and his understated leadership stood out. In one brief speech, he shared the story of mediating tensions among immigrant communities in Boston, striking a chord with many cardinals from conflict-affected nations. He was noted especially for his gentle yet firm approach to resolving disagreements, something many cardinals saw as invaluable in today's polarized world, marked by war, climate crisis, and mass migration. At Domus Sanctae Marthae, the Vatican guest house where the cardinals stayed, informal conversations took place in dining rooms, hallways, even the chapel. One African cardinal was overheard saying, "We're not looking for the most eloquent speaker. We're looking for someone who can reach out even to those who don't agree with him." The days leading up to the conclave were not merely political debates within the church, they were deeply spiritual. Many cardinals spent hours in silent prayer, seeking discernment before entering the Sistine Chapel under the towering frescoes of Michelangelo, where flickering candlelight mingled with whispered prayers. So when the white smoke appeared earlier than anyone expected after just 4 ballots, the world quickly understood consensus had been reached. And the name they had agreed upon was James O'Connor, now Leo XIV, a man who would come to symbolize courage and a deep longing for peace. James Michael O'Connor was born on June 12, 1958, in Boston, Massachusetts, into a devout Irish Catholic family. The son of an electrician and a nurse, he was raised among the wooden pews of his local parish, where scripture and faith were present at every family meal. The harsh winters of the Northeast never dimmed the inner light that guided his upbringing, rooted in devotion, humility, and a quiet call to service. These values, faith, humility, service, would later be reflected in the name he chose as Pope Leo XIII, a name that speaks with the strength of a lion, but carries the heart of a shepherd. Upon his election, he chose the papal name Leo XIV, a title layered with meaning. Leo, Latin for lion, is an ancient symbol of strength and courage. But this choice was far more than symbolic. It called to mind 2 towering figures from church history. Leo the Great, who stood before Attila the Hun with a cross in hand, defending Rome in the 5th century. And Leo III, who, by lamplight in 1891, penned Rerum Novarum, a groundbreaking encyclical that laid the foundation for Catholic social teaching and advocated for the dignity of workers. Inspired by Rerum Novarum, which he first encountered during his years in seminary, James O'Connor chose Leo as a personal vow to defend human dignity in a new era, not through force, but through dialogue and compassion. For him, the name was not just a mission, it was a way of life. Morning prayer in silence, listening to the poor, walking alongside the forgotten. Standing on the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica before a silent crowd below, he declared, "I chose the name Leo not to recall authority, but to remember a mercy that has the courage to speak for the voiceless." At a time when the wounds of the world run deep, from the war in Ukraine to the migration crisis and the devastating effects of climate change, the papacy of Leo XIV promises to face these challenges with courage and the light of the gospel. A mission born from faith and a journey that began in the quiet corners of Boston. Just hours after white smoke rose above the Sistine Chapel, global headlines asked the same question. Can a pope from America guide the church through the roughest terrain of the 21st century? And indeed, what awaited Leo XIV was not a throne, but a cross shaped by the very times we live in. Each morning begins the same way. In a small chapel at Domus Sanctae Marthae, the Pope sits in silent prayer where candlelight and psalms blend with the hush of the early wind. Afterward, a simple breakfast with Vatican staff, a quiet gesture, but one that speaks volumes about his grounded lifestyle in a role burdened with immense challenges. The first challenge: a world in pieces. The skies over Ukraine still carry the smoke of war. Cities across the Middle East remain in rubble. Millions have been forced to flee their homes, driven out by conflict, poverty, or climate collapse. Climate change is no longer a theory. It's flash floods in Pakistan, wildfires in Brazil, rising seas sweeping away coastal villages in the Philippines. More than 100 million refugees now crowd Europe's borders or wander through storm-struck towns with no names left on the maps. The Pope commands no armies. He writes no laws, but Leo XIV holds a deeper power, moral authority, and he knows, in this era, the silence of leaders can sound a lot like complicity. The second challenge between tradition and reform. The Church today walks a delicate tightrope. One side holds bishops fiercely guarding tradition. The other calls for change, women in leadership, ministry for LGBTQ+ Catholics, rethinking priestly celibacy. Guided by the motto, Fides et Caritas, faith and charity, Leo XIV approaches these tensions with quiet listening. He doesn't rush to issue decrees. He shows up. He listens. A close advisor said he's not afraid of disagreement. He's only afraid he won't be patient enough to truly understand someone's pain. The third challenge, restoring broken trust. After decades of devastating abuse scandals, many have left the Church quietly and without looking back. The deepest wound wasn't just in the acts themselves, it was in the silence, the secrecy, the indifference. Leo XIV is expected to change that. He may launch an independent commission made up of both laypeople and bishops that meets regularly at the Vatican to oversee child protection and financial transparency. If realized, it would mark the first time the Church publicly institutionalized self-accountability. The fourth challenge. A global pope for a fractured age. Leo XIV cannot be just a pope for Europe. He is called to speak for 1.4 billion Catholics across Africa, Asia, Latin America, and countless corners of the world still waiting to be heard. Sources in the Vatican suggest he may visit a refugee camp near the Jordanian border, kneeling to hear the stories of the displaced, just as he once did as Archbishop of Boston, walking with doctors on winter nights to care for the homeless. There is also talk of interfaith forums, perhaps at Harvard, Oxford, or public universities where students of all backgrounds might reflect together on faith, action, and responsibility in a fractured world. The final and most urgent challenge. The next generation. In Europe, only 10–15% of young people still practice their faith. In the U.S., those identifying as non-religious now outnumber Catholics. To many young people, the Church feels more like heritage than hope. Leo XIV understands the Church cannot sit still and wait. It must move slowly, honestly, and humbly toward them. Through presence, through the courage to face hard questions, and through the quiet acknowledgement that even in doubt, grace can still make a home. Faced with this uneven road, Leo XIV, with the name of a lion and the heart of a shepherd, moves forward not to conquer, but to carry the light of hope. Just as he once did, walking among Boston's poor, long before the world knew his name. When Cardinal James Michael O'Connor stepped onto the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica and took the name Leo XIV, a wave of joy swept across St. Peter's Square. But just hours later, a quiet storm of debate was already spreading through international media. Can a pope from the United States truly preserve the Vatican's tradition of neutrality? For centuries, the Vatican has carefully positioned itself above national power blocs. But the United States is not just any nation, it is a global superpower, politically, militarily, and culturally. In Cairo, Muslim clerics whispered concerns that a Western pope might bring a biased tone to interfaith dialogue. In Buenos Aires, crowds gathered outside churches, worried that an Americanized Vatican might overshadow long-held priorities in Latin America, such as economic justice and indigenous rights. And in Europe, some Vatican watchers warned, no matter how humble Leo XIV may be, the fact that he is American will cast a long shadow over his papacy. Still, not all reactions were skeptical, some were deeply hopeful. In Africa and Southeast Asia, many bishops welcomed Leo XIV's pastoral sensitivity. His years working with immigrants, minorities, and marginalized communities were seen as a powerful qualification. A cardinal from Kenya put it plainly, "He does not come from the U.S. government. He comes from the working-class streets of Boston." For many American Catholics, from Irish Americans to black communities, his election was a moment of pride. For the first time, their voice was being heard in the heart of the Vatican. With characteristic humility, Leo XIV began reaching out handwritten letters to Middle Eastern clerics, invitations to Vatican dialogue, an approach shaped by years serving multi-ethnic parishes as a priest in Boston. Ironically, it is in America, his homeland, where division appears most visible. Conservative Catholics hope Leo XIV will uphold traditional teachings on marriage and family. Progressives expect bold reform on everything from the ordination of women to LGBTQ+ inclusion. One newspaper described his position as walking a tightrope across the Grand Canyon, every step holding the potential to ignite reaction. With the name Leo and a deep well of mercy, he responded to controversy with a simple but profound statement delivered privately to his fellow cardinals. "I come from America, but I do not belong to America. I belong to the Church." In that single line, he did not reject his roots. He simply made clear where his loyalty lies with the universal Church. James Michael O'Connor was never born to be Pope. He grew up in a modest wooden home on the outskirts of Boston, the son of an electrician and a nurse in a working-class Irish Catholic family. Every evening, the family knelt together to pray the rosary not out of ritual, but because, in those lean years, it was the only inheritance his parents could pass down. To them, faith wasn't a sermon, it was patience, lived out in quiet love. As a teenager, James spent weekends volunteering at a homeless shelter in Roxbury. There, he first heard a confession from a man who had taken a life and was too ashamed to set foot in a church. James didn't preach. He simply sat beside him. And in that moment, something was planted that no textbook could ever teach. A vocation begins with listening. After graduating from Boston College in 1980, James entered St. John's Seminary and was ordained in 1985, not with fanfare, not with political backing, just a young priest assigned to a struggling parish in South Boston. In those early years, he pedaled his bike to visit the elderly, cooked soup for the homeless, and waited outside prison gates to hear the confessions of those the world had forgotten. In 1987, during a missionary trip to Honduras, he witnessed a young girl die from dehydration because the local hospital had no medicine. "I can't preach hope if I don't share in their hunger." That moment would later shape the name Leo XIV, a name symbolizing the courage of a lion and the mercy of a shepherd, anchored in the motto Fides et Caritas, faith and charity, which he has carried with him ever since. In 2010, after more than 2 decades in ministry, James was appointed Bishop of Springfield during the height of the Church's abuse crisis in America. He became the first bishop in the region to hold public dialogues with victims, apologizing not through lawyers, but face-to-face with no conditions. If one person suffers, we all suffer. In 2020, he was named Archbishop of Boston, one of the most sensitive roles in American Catholic life. There, he launched the Common Table Initiative, inviting immigrants and the homeless to share meals with clergy, building bridges in a city often torn by division. By 2023, Pope Francis elevated him to cardinal. He met with Muslim leaders in Boston, listening in silence, preparing for the interfaith role he would later inherit. A close advisor remarked, "It's not that he says much, it's that he speaks only when it matters." These experiences from Honduras to Boston prepared him not just to serve America, but the universal church, as he made clear amid debate over his nationality. When chosen inside the Sistine Chapel, under the watchful eyes of his fellow cardinals, he didn't weep. He simply gripped the old rosary his mother once gave him, smiled softly, and whispered a prayer, not like a victor, but like a man simply continuing the work he was called to do on a path that now led to the chair of St. Peter. From a quiet priest in a Boston neighborhood to the ancient throne of the Catholic Church, Leo XIII was never the expected choice, but perhaps he is exactly the kind of leader this moment demands. In a world drowning in conflict, division, and distrust, he chooses calm over confrontation, listening over judgment, and prayer over argument. The name Leo is more than a symbol of strength. It is a reminder it takes courage to speak the truth and mercy to keep the church standing when storms begin to rise. The papacy of Leo XIV has only just begun, but what he has lived and what he continues to live reminds us. A pope isn't the loudest voice in the room. He's the one who keeps the flame alive when the world begins to lose hope.